Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't come out here to disappear. I came to work, where the air stayed clean and the problems were straightforward. Change filters, grease bearings, log wind speeds, keep the beacon running, and check in with people who wore uniforms that matched mine once. My name is Elias Grant. I am 47 years old. Until last year, I was a Coast Guard electronics technician, the one people called when a transmitter wouldn't key or a radar overlay slipped miles off target, and no one knew why. When the contractors that took over lighthouse maintenance asked for someone who could live on a rock 8 miles off the Maine coast and keep a solar array, a diesel generator, a weather station, and a modern LED beacon online, I signed the paperwork. I figured I'd finally get quiet. The island is small. Locals call it Polecat, though maps use a sterile code, a number, and the word ledge. There is a lighthouse built in the 1800s and rebuilt every few decades, a low equipment building of cinder block, a shed that holds fuel drums and spare parts, and my quarters, a 2-room box with a metal roof that hums when the wind comes in from the east. The power system is simple, a 12-kilowatt solar field on aluminum mounts, a bank of lithium iron phosphate batteries in a vented room, and a diesel generator on automatic transfer for when the cloud cover lingers. Water comes from rain gutters into polyethylene tanks under the deck. The beacon is an LED assembly with a narrow flash characteristic and a backup lamp. It throws a clean pulse every 10 seconds. The foghorn is electronic and brutal at close range, the kind of sound you feel in your ribs. My job in normal times, weekly inspections, monthly test reports, daily weather logs, and a morning and evening check-in with the relay at Rockland Harbor on VHF channel 22A after hailing on 16. The routine keeps people honest. It kept me honest too, until the mornings changed. The first oddity was a missed voice on a Monday at 9 a.m. I called, Rockland Relay, Polecat Light, radio check and status, nothing but carrier hiss. I logged it, tried again at 5 p.m. and got a cheerful reply, just late enough to make me look twice at the clock. The next morning, I rolled out at 6:30 a.m., coffee balanced on the edge of a chart book and tuned around. Channel 16 was chatter, then quiet, then chatter again. A fishing boat argued with another about gear set too close to the line of buoys that marked the channel. Perfectly normal. At 9 a.m., silence. The weather radio on 162.400 MHz hummed through its forecast cycle. A familiar synthetic voice promising a pressure change. Small craft advisory by late Wednesday. The buoy data came in fine, wave heights bumping up and down as they always did, wind backing from south to southwest in the afternoon. All systems green. The second missed check-in felt like deja vu. I kept my voice level on the third day. Rockland Relay, Polecat Light. I listened to an empty slice of spectrum and heard only my own breathing. I went upstairs to the lantern room with binoculars and scanned the horizon. Penobscot Bay lay flat as hammered tin. No lobster boats running out early. No small wake lines pointing home. The ferry route toward Vinalhaven looked empty too, which rarely happened. It didn't mean much, I told myself. There are days fishermen rest and days sea lanes go quiet. But the quiet stuck to me. At 5 p.m. I got a garbled voice and half a laugh, like the other end of a joke that had no setup. Then a cut-off carrier. I wrote exactly that in the log. On Thursday, I went through each piece of gear like I was troubleshooting antenna connection on the VHF. Copper ground strap tight to the lightning rod. Feedline shield intact with no salt creep under the boot. No corrosion inside the PL259. The VHF set signal meter reacted to my weather receiver when I coupled in a test lead, which told me the receiver front end was good. Everything here was fine. Whatever I wasn't hearing lived on the other end. NOAA kept talking just like always, which was its own small mercy. Those broadcast stations are on big towers and keep going even when the world gets messy. The voice told me about wind shifts and wave periods and fog advisories, and in the gaps between words, I heard nothing human. The first unmistakable sign came 3 days later in plain language. I had the weather radio on while I re-talked the terminals on the battery bus. The voice cut mid-sentence and switched to the tone pattern I know too well. After the attention sequence, a different voice came on, recorded and pushed at intervals from somewhere inland. It said there was a mass infection, that violent attacks were occurring, and that people in affected areas should stay indoors, limit movement, and wait for instructions. It repeated the phrase. There was no place name attached to it in the first minute. Later in the hour, a second version named a regional emergency office 200 miles away. I wrote down the time, the frequency, and the exact phrases, because that is what the paperwork trains you to do. I walked up to the lantern room again, set the binoculars on the railing, and looked toward the coast. The weather was too clear not to notice it. Threads of smoke beyond the line of spruce. More than a brush pile. More than a chimney. Many of them. I don't scare easily. You use your hands long enough and fix enough broken things, and ride enough winter seas in small boats, and you learn to clock your fear and put it on the shelf where you can see it. But that afternoon, every sound was sharper than it should have been. The wind tower vibration through the roof tin sounded like someone walking. The loose coupling on the generator exhaust bracket sounded like a knock at the door. I keyed up on channel 16 and sent a hailing call. A carrier flickered back, then died. If anyone was there, they were too far or too busy to talk. I pulled the inventory lists and updated them. Food. 30 pounds of rice, 15 of beans, 3 5-gallon pails labelled with dates, enough canned meat and vegetables to feed 2 people for 3 months if we were cautious. Water. Tanks at 60% after a light rain, filters clean, spare cartridges sealed. Fuel. 6 55-gallon drums of off-road diesel in the shed, treated with biocide, the generator tank half full. Batteries at 84% state of charge. Solar output good when the clouds parted. Radios. VHF fixed mount in the communications nook. A handheld VHF for when I went outside. A small HF transceiver with an end-fed wire antenna on a fiberglass pole for long range in case something really went wrong. And I needed to hear people not in my neighborhood. When the sun went down, I tried the HF set. It took me back to sitting in a cutter radio room on mid-watch, tuning past the stutter of static, listening for clear lines in the noise. On 40 meters, I heard a station in Ontario. On 20 meters, someone from the Midwest called for anyone who could relay to a public safety office. None of it referenced our coastline. None of it felt close enough to be the right fire to run toward. I signed the log and went to bed, though I didn't call it that. I lay on top of the blanket and stared at the listing of the day's events. I wrote 2 words in the wide margin. Stay practical. When you live on a small rock with a narrow dock, you realize how many things can reach you, even when you pretend you are out of reach. Wind, wave, sound. Long drifts of seaweed that choke a pump intake, and people, if they want to. The first boat that arrived did not look like a boat anyone wanted anymore. It rolled in on a steady swell 6 days after the emergency message, 2 hours past sunset. I heard the clunk of plastic hull on rock and thought for a half second that it was a seal. Then I smelled gasoline and old bilge. I climbed the ladder to the walkway around the lighthouse and shone a light toward the inlet. A small fiberglass sailboat lay crooked on the rocks. Its mast was snapped at the spreaders. The sails hung in shredded shapes that slapped against the deck. No one called out. I went down with a handheld VHF, my foul weather coat over a sweatshirt, and a telescoping boat hook. The dinghy cradle was empty, which made me think whoever had been aboard tried to leave before they hit. I got close enough to lay the boat hook across the coaming and peered in. There were handprints in something dried to a dark sheen, a duffel bag wedged under the companionway, a stove mounted askew, no bodies, No one breathing. I backed away and stood still long enough for the water to soak through one boot. Then I took the duffel. Inside was a vacuum-packed bundle rain gear, a first aid kit, a hand flare, a small fixed-blade knife in a plastic sheath, protein bars, and a laminated card with 3 names written in block letters. I set the knife aside. Because knives are easy to use and hard to justify later, I stowed the rest. There were no wallets, no chart book, no handheld radio. Whoever left was in a hurry or in a lot of trouble, or both. The second arrival came with an engine. It also came with words, which makes a difference on a night when every wave crest looks like a person. I heard the hum first, then the outboard coughed and went quiet. A female voice carried across the water. "Hello, we see your light." My hand went to the handheld radio out of habit. I answered the human voice without touching the push to talk. "Stay off the rocks. Come around to the dock. It's the only clear way in." I switched on the dock light and stood where anyone on the boat could see me. When the skiff nosed in, I saw 2 people. A man in his 50s, with a driver's posture at the tiller, and a girl maybe 15, maybe 16, with a knit cap under a hood. They were neither armed nor careless. They tied their bowline without being told and kept their hands where I could see them. The man lifted a small backpack as if to say it was what they had. "I'm Elias," I said. "This is a working station. I can't guarantee anything except that it's dry under a roof and you can warm up." The man nodded and put a hand on the gunwale to steady himself. "I'm Paul Sutter. This is my daughter, Kayla. We came from Portland. We didn't have many options left once the road to the marina got crowded." I let them stand at the threshold while I did what we always do now when we meet anyone. I looked for fever signs, checked their pupils, watched for tremors. I didn't have a medical kit that could diagnose much, but I had a body's sense for when something is off. They were exhausted and cold and hungry. They weren't sick, not obviously. I had them wash their hands with bleach-diluted water in a tub by the door and put their wet jackets on hooks. I gave them mugs of broth and a towel each, and the strict warning that I had one firm rule. No one opens an exterior door without telling me first. I wasn't playing sheriff. I was accounting for the fact that one bad judgment in a place with one entrance can get all of us into trouble we can't get out of. When you feed people after they've been running, you learn quickly what they've seen. It's the pauses that tell you most. Kayla ate methodically and concentrated on the spoon. Paul ate fast until he realized it, then slowed down in the self-conscious way adults do when they're trying to model calm. He said Portland fell apart in 3 days, then held in pockets, then quit pretending it could hold. He said the first news made it sound like a flu with bites and fever, and nothing anyone could confirm. Then the hospitals filled. Then the silence came. He saw a patrol car drift through an intersection and keep going because the officer inside looked like he was the last person who should make promises to strangers, and he knew it. "Are you sure about the dead?" I asked. I didn't want to say the word that comes after that. He didn't flinch. "I saw people get hit, go down, stop moving, and then start again in a way that doesn't fit anything I understand. We saw it twice close. We didn't wait around the 3rd time." I asked how they found me. Paul said they ran down the ramp at a private marina when a gate was cut and took an old skiff, whose outboard still had keys zip-tied to the handle. They followed my beacon because no one else was lighting theirs anymore. It is a strange compliment to get from anyone. We came to you because you were the only thing left doing its job. No one sleeps well their first night in a place that isn't theirs. I gave them the bunk room next to the tool closet and told them which floorboard creaked near the bathroom. Small, useful facts are more welcoming than any speech. I didn't sleep much either. I lay on my back and went through the system state in my head. Power, okay. Water, okay. Diesel reserve, high. Food, 2 more stomachs to feed. Structural limits, intact. External doors latched, weather. Fog starting after midnight with a light north breeze. Radios, quiet. At 3 a.m, I got up and walked the perimeter with a handheld light. The island under fog is a different place. Every rope looks like a line someone left on purpose. Every gull sounds like something else. Paul asked what he could do. I gave him a bucket of bolts and a driver and had him help me add a steel plate over the wood that had always been fine, when the only thing we kept out was a winter storm. Kayla asked what she could do. I had her string empty cans on monofilament across the path from the dock and the track that runs around the base of the lighthouse. It looks old-fashioned, and it is, but so is the sound of a can bouncing on rock at 2 a.m. You wake up at that sound. When we broke for lunch, I told them I might act like I was overly careful in ways that would get me mocked on the mainland, but out here, caution is cheap and mistakes are expensive. Kayla gave me the closest thing to a smile I'd seen on her. My dad says that about breaker panels. Always turn off the right one before you go poking around. We worked through the afternoon and installed extra angle brackets inside the window frames. I welded flat bar across the emergency exit, not to block it, but to make it something you had to think about before you could force it. The generator bay already had a padlock. I added a second because I didn't want someone to shut us down by flipping one lever. We took the spare rebar lengths from the shed and ground the ends to a blunt taper, then wrapped a foot of paracord below the tips so the hands don't slip if a grip gets sweaty. None of us wanted to put why we were making those tools into words, so we didn't. I set them on hooks by the door like I would any other piece of equipment. By evening, I had the VHF mast down on its hinge. The old marine whip antenna was sound, but if I wanted more reach, I needed a little height. We bolted a 10-foot section of aluminum conduit to the hinge point, attached the existing antenna to the top, and guyed the new section with 3 lines of Dacron tied to the railing stanchions. It wasn't pretty, but it put the antenna above the lantern deck, and at 8 miles off the coastline of sight matters. We checked the SWR with a meter. The needles stayed in the safe part of the scale. I keyed channel 16 and sent a standard hailing call, followed by a directed call to the relay. The carrier that came back was steady but weak, like someone heard me but didn't want to say who they were. I tried again at 5 p.m. The same. That night, we heard the first human voice that wasn't ours since Paul and Kayla arrived. It didn't come from the VHF. It came from my small HF set, which I tuned at dusk, because I wanted to hear if the world beyond the bay still had coordinates and place names that matched mine. On a frequency that carries well after sunset, a man said he was part of a group moving north along the coast in a set of boats. He used the word convoy and said a Navy unit was coordinating. He named Halifax. He said they were making runs to pick up people on islands when they could. His voice broke twice, which I can forgive. Long distance HF does that. I answered and gave our position relative to landmarks any mariner knows. He said, "Copy." And then a rush of other voices spilled in like someone had lifted a hand off a room full of microphones. When it cleared, he was gone. For the next 3 days, we did what people do when trouble grows slowly enough to plan around. We planned and we moved. I ran the generator only long enough to exercise it, because diesel is wealth on an island. We used the solar bank carefully and set the inverter to a conservative low-voltage cutout to protect the batteries. We offloaded the last usable items from the wrecked sailboat, a set of foul weather pants, a half roll of duct tape, 2 glass jugs. We made 4 more triple arms and learned that a line of cans can sound like a symphony in a gust front if you set them too close together. So we spaced them wider and tied small stones inside to lower their pitch and make their sound less like the wind. We talked about leaving if a larger group arrived armed and desperate. I told Paul that in that case, we drop the dock ladder and pull it onto the rocks where it is hard to climb. He looked at me like a man weighing how heavy a choice will feel later. Then he nodded. On the 4th day, I spotted a fishing vessel at the outer edge of where a man convinces his eyes the world is clear. It was wrong the way it sat. Small course corrections didn't happen when they should have. No one came onto the foredeck to adjust a line. Every mariner knows what a boat looks like when it is being tended. This one drifted. I went to the brass telescope in the lantern room, because it's steadier than binoculars when your hands aren't. I saw figures, not working, not talking, not looking with purpose, standing. One slid in a way that matched the motion of the swell, but not the motion of a person who trusts their own legs. It took another 10 minutes for the boat to slide close enough for detail, and by the time it did, I didn't need any. If you have never watched people who are not themselves anymore move, then I envy you. If you have, you understand why I don't describe it for long. They were on deck and in the scuppers, and leaning against the rail. They didn't call out. They didn't react to our voices. They didn't notice the boat scraping the rock until the motion changed under their feet. The tide and the rocks did our work for us that afternoon. The vessel ground along the ledge and heeled enough to make boarding it a bad idea for any living thing. We went quiet. I shut down the dock light. I kept the foghorn off because there are tools for offence and tools for control, and it was not time to draw attention. When the swell rolled the boat back into the channel, the figures slid out of sight, some into the water, some behind the wheelhouse. I don't know where they went. The sea takes what it wants. That is not poetry. That is inventory. We agreed not to use the beacon at full intensity at night. It's not legally sound to dim a navigation light. I know what those charts mean to the people who read them, but the people who would be reading them hadn't answered a radio call in a week. I changed the setting to a lower power that still threw a pulse visible from the approaches, but not from farther east. I cut the foghorn's automatic trigger and put it on manual. The point here wasn't to pretend we weren't here. It was to make sure anyone who found us did so by intention, not by accident. We were done with accidents. The weather did not ask what we wanted. A low started building on the radar, and the weather station logged a pressure drop that made the back of my neck itch. The NOAA voice called it without drama. Gale conditions, seas increasing, poor visibility in rain and fog, thunder possible, wind clocking from east to southeast overnight. If you have stood on a small island in a nor'easter, you know there is no substitute for it. If you haven't, imagine every part of your house pressed by a slow hand for hours. We spent the daylight hours making sure nothing would fly away and nothing would knock loose. I tightened the gate latch on the generator shed until it squealed. We wrapped the solar array with a temporary web of lines to reduce the slap and hum in gusts. We shoved heavy timbers against the door to the equipment room, even though the hinges would hold and the deadbolt would hold and the steel plate would hold. Redundancy is respect when the wind comes in off open water. I ran the generator for a half hour before sunset to top the battery bank and shut down early. Then I set the HF receiver to a maritime frequency and left the volume just high enough to catch a human voice if it came through. We ate early. Kayla set a deck of cards on the table and we played a game without naming the rules because naming anything felt arrogant. The storm came in sections. First, the roll under the floor at 10 p.m, long period swells that made the dishes rattle. Then, the chop in the mix when the local wind disagreed with the swells. At 1 a.m, the first real push. A steady 60 seconds of white noise and a rattle at the north window, where I had missed a screw, and the frame asked for it now. I got up, pulled on boots, and drove the screw into place in my socks, while the rain licked over the sill like a dog that wasn't yours. I told Paul to rest. He didn't argue, which is how you know a man has listened to the part of himself that is too tired to fight. At 2:17 a.m, the trip cans on the south path clattered. I remember the time because I wrote it down later and underlined it. The sound of a can rolling over rock through a storm is not loud. It is distinct. It clicks in a rhythm that no wind can copy. I moved without talking, handed a pike to Paul, and pointed to the interior hallway. I told Kayla to stay in the bunk room and not open the door unless she heard my voice say her name and the word clear. You do not improvise words when you give instructions like that in a storm. We took positions at the top of the interior steps that led down to the little courtyard between buildings. The light from the storm lantern threw a steady cone. I set the foghorn remote switch on the shelf and kept my finger away from it because a blast at the wrong time is as dangerous as silence at the right one. I didn't have to wait more than 30 seconds before a shape brushed the bottom edge of the door. You know the difference between a person who tests a door and a person who leans on it with all they have left. This lean belonged to the second kind. The door holds when it's built to, but wood is still wood. The plates and bars groaned the way a tree trunk groans in ice. The handle shook. The deadbolt knocked in its housing. Then the sound changed. It went from one push to several, the traffic noise you hear at a stadium gate when someone decides the right idea is to go together. We held position. The plates held. The latch held. The bottom corner of the frame lifted a quarter inch. A hand or something like it slid under, scraped and retreated. The storm said nothing about any of it. I didn't reach for a gun because in the close spaces of a lighthouse stairwell there are better tools. I caught Paul's eye and pointed to the pike hooks we'd mounted beside the door for just this kind of work. When the next hard push came and a silhouette stumbled into the courtyard, we set the points to the ground and held the shafts low and out so that anything that forced itself through would meet a stop before it met us. We stayed steady. We did not rush. We did not chase. The terrible thing about infected people, I will write that phrase because I need it to live on paper, is not only how they move, but how they do not shift when they should. The pikes turned bodies aside. The steel plate turned the next wave. Something fell outside and did not get up. Then the cans rattled to the east and we realized the path by the dock had company too. Ciao. It ended as storms end, with a change in sound. The knocks on the door became irregular and then rare. The rattle of lines in rain shifted to a lower, constant roar as the wind clocked. The only thing that stayed steady was the noise in my chest, which is something I write only because later I will want to know I admitted it. We kept our positions until the sky and the slice of window above the door lifted from black to grey. At 6 a.m, I cracked the door, let rain in and looked down. There were signs of what had come. Prints, a shredded sleeve, a smear on a stone where someone had slid hard and then gone quiet. I closed the door and bolted it and told the others we would rest before any cleanup. There was nothing to gain by stepping into that courtyard with our heart rates still high. By noon, the wind had settled to something a human being can think in, and the rain moved in curtains that let you see an island again. We put on rain gear and went outside as a group. I carried a pike and a hand flare in a pocket because even after sunrise in a storm, you need layers of answers. The infected that had made it into the courtyard were not there now. The ones that had fallen by the outside wall had slid toward the rocks. The sea had taken some. We walked the perimeter slow. At the dock, a mooring line snapped at some point in the night, and the skiff banged new marks into the posts, but it was still there, upright and usable. The solar array had lost one corner bracket, which we bolted back with spares. The guy lines that held the extended VHF mast had held. The triple arms needed to be restrung. The angle brackets on the window frames had done their job. We set a new bar across the main door in case the wood had taken a set. We logged damage like it was any other storm morning because it helps to treat trouble with procedures you recognize. After lunch, Paul said the thing that had sat unspoken in the room since he arrived. We could try for help. He meant call. He meant ask. He meant if the man on the radio had been real, we could give him a place and a name, and he could bring a boat that would take 2 people away from here. He also meant that if we called and the wrong person answered, we could invite the wrong attention. The balance sat there. It was my island by contract and habit, but not my decision alone now. I told them we would attempt contact once at sundown, with the antenna height as it stood, and we would not repeat the call if we got any sign that a broader group was listening for voices to follow home. At 7:30 p.m, the band conditions favoured long skip, the kind that makes distant stations sound like they are in your hallway. I tuned up and called in plain language, location by reference to charts and compass bearings, number of people, condition, and the fact that we could stay put for 1 week without resupply at current consumption. I did not say rescue. I said, if you are the unit that claimed Halifax and you are taking lists of islands that can hold a pickup for 2 people, this is a report. If you are not that unit, disregard. The voice that came back sounded older than it had 2 nights earlier. He said his call sign and used a simple identifier that matches a maritime station rather than a hobbyist. He named 2 islands he had taken people off and 1 he had not, because the approach was wrong and the people on the rocks were not living anymore. He said their window was small and they would not risk large craft close to shore because of groundings and because of passengers. He said the word quiet. Understood, I said. We can push a small skiff off the dock in a sea up to 2 feet and meet mid-channel if the timing is exact. Kayla watched my face the way people watch a friend purge water from a regulator on a dive, waiting for the moment when it either works or it doesn't. Copy, he said. We are south to north in 2 days. Channel 16 for approach when in range. The carrier fell off. So did the small hope that comes when someone tells you a particular number of days. I looked at Paul and at Kayla. They read what I hadn't said yet. We're not all going, I said. 2 seats is what you can promise now. You should take them. Paul shook his head once. You are not saying that because you want to be a hero. You are saying that because you think the boat they're bringing won't hold 3. We can wait for the next one. I don't think there is a next one for a while, I said. Fuel, time, people to crew. If they can make this trip at all, they'll make it once. If they see smoke or movement on a deck that isn't ours, they'll turn and go anyway. I can hold here. You don't need to like that. You can hate it later if you want, but it is a fact I am offering. It took them an hour to accept and another 20 minutes to pack the little they had. The island held its breath the way places do when you decide something big while the weather is still polite enough to let you pretend time is your friend. We set a plan, a watch every 2 hours between now and sundown the next day, a go bag staged by the door, the skiff fueled and a second can lashed in. We would keep the radios dark until we heard a voice speak our names. And even then, we would not say a word until we saw a hull that matched the claim. At dawn the next day, the sea wore a skin of glass that would not last. I ran a small set of checks and made coffee and let my eyes go over the lines I had tied last night. Kayla took her turn on the lighthouse balcony and called down that she saw nothing but 2 gulls who had decided they owned the tip of the dock. At 10 a.m., I heard a voice call our island by the name mariners use. The voice used my name next, which meant he had kept a list. I answered with a single word acknowledgement and asked for range and bearing. Southwest, 2 miles, he said. Small boat, 2 aboard. We'll come no closer. You meet us at midpoint. I told them copy and looked at Paul. He put his hand on the skiff cowling. You sure? I'm sure, I said. You drive her more gently than you did on the way in. Mind the channel. If you see anything that makes your stomach go cold, you turn back. They will not fault you for that. You understand? Kayla nodded. She hugged me without warning and then let go just as fast. Thank you, she said. Maybe she meant for food and a roof. Maybe she meant for telling her father what he needed to hear without making him say it. Maybe she meant for the lighthouse being what it is. It doesn't matter which. They pushed off at 10:20 a.m. I went to the lantern room. Through binoculars, I saw a low boat that moved the way good boats move when people who know them are aboard. It slowed at the line where we had agreed. The skiff slowed too, then stopped too early, then crept. In these inches, the world happens. I saw a shape in the water between them that wasn't a seal and wasn't driftwood. I saw 3 more 20 yards off the beam. The sea carried people like it carries anything. The small boat swung its bow fast, then nosed forward to pick up Paul and Kayla at speed, then gunned it when a hand that did not belong where it was reached for the rail. I heard no words. The sea throws away sound. I saw the boat lift and settle, and then run like it meant to leave. I watched it until my arms ached, and the shapes in the water lost their outlines in the glare. When I couldn't follow it any longer, I put the glass down and stood at the railing where the paint had peeled last winter and didn't care. The lighthouse doesn't ask who you are. It asks what you can do for it. After I ate, I went back to work. I set the beacon to its full intensity for the first time in days. because whatever obligations I have to the living who might aim a bow toward a rock are still obligations. I took down the decoy raft we'd rigged to look like trouble and stowed the propane canisters we'd attached to its frame. I restrung the trip alarms and added 2 fresh lines where the old ones scraped. I moved the pikes to a rack near the door and labelled the rack with numbers, because when you feel the need to count something, let it be tools and not days. Then I did the thing I had put off since the storm. I walked the rocks at low tide and looked for what the sea leaves. I did not go farther than I had to. I took a pair of long tongs and a shovel and a coil of rope, and I lifted or pushed what needed to be moved back into the water. I did not look in faces. I did not write names. I said nothing out loud. When I was done, I scrubbed my boots with brine and bleach and left them on the outer step. That night, I sat by the radio but did not turn it on. I listened to the foghorn off an island south of us that still had power, or a generator that hadn't run out of fuel yet, or a keeper who refused to let it go quiet. My hand hovered over the switch that would bring my own horn to life. I didn't press it. Too many people think they can follow a sound to salvation and end up on a rock. It would be my fault as much as theirs if I invited that now. Days shape themselves around jobs. In good weather, I sanded and painted the places where the last nor'easter bit into the trim, because rust and rot are patient enemies. I kept the battery room at a temperature that keeps lithium happy. I got the rainwater filtration system to a level that would make my old crew chief nod. I checked fuses and replaced ones whose metal looked dull, because dull metal on an island is a forecast. I ran drills by myself, which sounds foolish until you imagine the one time you wish you had. I timed how long it would take me to seal the main door, to move from the lantern room to the generator shed, to carry a battery module from one pallet to another without wrenching my back. I made a list labelled "if sick" with instructions for myself. Isolate in the workshop, mask up, bleach surfaces, set a note on the door, and do not open for anyone. Writing it made me breathe easier. Plans do that even when you hope you never use them. I spoke out loud each morning, whether anyone heard me or not. Polecat light, status check. I touched the radio microphone and then set it back in its cradle like a hot pan. I kept the beacon on a schedule, full brightness on nights when fog sat low and dimmer on clear nights just before moonrise. I kept daily weather logs with pressure, wind, visibility and sea state in the same neat handwriting I used on cutters, because if anyone came later to ask what happened here, they'd know I didn't let the standard slip. Now and then, a boat appeared on the horizon. Most drifted and then moved on. Once, a larger hull came too close, and I hit the foghorn switch twice for deterrence. Then once in a steady blast, it turned away. Another day, a small raft of drift material held 3 shapes that did not lift hands, but moved as the raft caught on a tide line. I didn't approach. Sometimes helping one in the water means pulling 5 more you don't see closer, and you learn that hard lesson only once. At noon one Tuesday, the HF receiver picked up the voice of the convoy again. He hurried through check-ins north of me. He did not call my name. A part of me wanted to jump in and remind him I existed, that I still had a roof and 2 hands, that I had a list that included cleaning the intake filter on the generator cooling circuit. I didn't. There are times to call for company and times to give it quiet. If he moved boats and people and fuel through waters where neither fuel nor people nor boats were plentiful, he did not need me tying him up for a sentimental nod. After a week, the routine settled enough to let one thought in that I had pushed aside. A lighthouse is more than its light. It is a sign. It says, in a simple language, there is a hazard here, but there is also someone who will mark it for you. That obligation does not change, because the mainland decided it had other obligations. I could keep the light burning for months if nothing major broke, years if luck decided to be kind. I can also keep the door closed if hands that are not thinking want to open it. Those 2 tasks became my life. Every other plan I made attached to them. The weather turned fine one morning and then hot in a way that Maine manages for a week each summer. Heat brings smells and sounds you miss in the cold. I smelled creosote from the dock pilings and the sweet metal odor of warm, galvanized steel. I heard a family of oyster catchers complain at the rocks and two gulls argue over a fish that didn't want either of them. In the middle of it, I heard a voice on VHF Channel 16 call for anyone off a particular point to the north. The call signs were not official, but the tone was. I answered with the station name and offered a relay if they needed one. The woman on the other end said she had a small group aboard and was looking for a safe spot to set a broken finger and let a child sleep. I said I couldn't invite them to my dock because I had no quarantine procedures that would keep us safe if one of theirs got sick later, and I was honest about it because lies make more trouble than they solve. I gave her a cove name 2 miles north, where the sand is long and the rocks are kind, and told her the tide would help if she came at 2:30 p.m. instead of now. She thanked me without anger. You don't always get that in a day's work, but when you do, it stays. I won't pretend I didn't wonder, later that evening, whether I should have said, "Come here." There is a kind of loneliness that sounds like the slow turn of a wind generator on a windless day. I heard it. I still let the light do its job and left the door closed. At sunset one day, I climbed the tower with the logbook under my arm. The glass panes needed washing. I wiped them down with diluted vinegar because it keeps the salt film at bay. I wrote the day's weather and the generator's hours and the system's state of charge, and a list of parts I'd like someone to bring me if anyone ever asked. Then I wrote a paragraph I didn't think I would write again. To anyone who finds this if I am not here, the beacon is set to automatic and the backup bulb is in place. The battery bank is healthy. The diesel is in the drums in the shed with treatment per label. The water tanks are 3/4 full. The radio spares are in the grey bin by the bench. The foghorn is manual. Don't use it unless you mean to. The sea goes on doing what it does. The mainland will sort itself or it won't. There will be more survivors who follow lights and more who follow their own kind of signal into places they should not. There will be voices on the HF bands that make promises, and a few will keep them. Out here, I know what I can do. I can hold this place and keep the light honest and make sure that if anyone comes to my door for the wrong reason, they leave without breaking the door. I can fix things that bend. I can build tools that stop what needs stopping without breaking my own rules about what kind of man I want to be. I stood on the lantern deck one night, 3 weeks into this new world, and listened to the calm I had come here to find. It was not the same calm I used to get when the last daily check-in was done, and the battery logs were filed. It wasn't that tidy, but it was real. The flash pattern rolled like it always did, measured and consistent, a polite warning to anyone with eyes on the horizon. I kept it that way. If someone finds me here months from now and asks why, I'll show them the logbooks and the racks of tools, and the way the door bar nests into its metal saddle, and the line of cans that click at 2 a.m. when the wind is wrong. And I'll say, because I could. The night before the first frost of fall, the HF receiver brought me one last contact from the north. A voice said a convoy had made it to a safe harbour for the moment. They had fuel enough for little boats, and they were looking for lights they could trust. He said my island by name. He said a teenager and her father had made it aboard safely and had asked them to thank me. I didn't answer. I did not need to tie up their time. I did not need the feedback loop of gratitude to put what I had done in order. I said it quietly to the empty room anyway. You're welcome. I turned up the beacon 1 notch and went to bed. The wind came later and rattled the roof and woke the gulls. At 2:13 a.m, the cans clattered on the south path, and I rose, pulled on my boots, and took my place by the door with the pike in my hands, steady and prepared. The island held, the light flashed, and somewhere 8 miles away, a coastline slept or didn't, healed or didn't, but remained the coastline I had signed up to mark. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.